The stock market just hit another record high, and it has never mattered less to the person watching it. Barron saw the headline on his phone this morning: S&P 500 closes at a record, right above a text from his landlord raising the rent. He flipped the phone face down and finished his cereal. 3 floors up, same building, Nikki saw the same headline. She didn't flip her phone over. She watched a number in her brokerage app tick up by more than Barron makes in a year, sipped her coffee, and got on with her morning. Same city, same building, same words on the same screen, two completely different planets. My name is Nick, and today we're answering the question quietly driving everyone insane. If the world is so obviously on fire, if everything costs more and nobody can buy a house, then why does the stock market keep throwing a party like nothing's wrong? This isn't a story about the market being wrong, it's about what that scoreboard is actually measuring, and why it was never measuring you. So here's the first thing you have to understand, and it's the thing almost nobody says out loud. The stock market is not the economy. I know you've heard that phrase before, tossed around by people on TV who then immediately fail to explain what it means. So let me actually explain it. Think of the stock market as a giant scoreboard hanging over a stadium. Your instinct, a completely reasonable instinct, is to assume that scoreboard is measuring how the whole crowd is doing. It isn't. It's measuring how a very small number of players down on the field are doing. You're in the stands, most of us are in the stands. And that scoreboard lighting up green doesn't mean your seat got any more comfortable or your beer got any cheaper. It just means the players you paid to watch are having a fantastic night. Once you actually internalize that one image, the paradox stops being a paradox and starts being kind of obvious. Because here's the second layer, and it's a big one. The stock market doesn't care about right now. It never has. The economy, jobs, wages, the price of eggs, whether your rent went up again, that's a measure of what's happening today. The stock market is a bet on what a handful of enormous companies will earn years from now. It's not a thermometer, it's a fortune teller, and a pretty overconfident one. So when you feel broke today and the market rips to a new high on the very same day, those two things aren't even describing the same time period. You're describing your Tuesday. The market is pricing in 2030, and here's the kicker, it's not even pricing in your 2030. Roughly 28% of the revenue that the companies in the S&P 500 bring in doesn't even come from the United States. It comes from overseas. For the big technology companies specifically, it's more than half. So take that board you keep anxiously glancing at, the one you assume reflects your town, your job, your local grocery store. A huge chunk of it isn't measuring any of that. It's measuring how well Apple sells phones in Europe and how many chips get shipped to data centers on the other side of the planet. Your struggling Tuesday and a booming S&P 500 were never a contradiction. They were never even on the same map. And if you want proof that the market and your actual life can just wander off in totally different directions, look at history. In early 2020, during the worst of the pandemic, unemployment exploded to levels not seen since the Great Depression. People were genuinely terrified. And the stock market? It crashed for about a month, then turned around and sprinted to brand new record highs while millions of people were still out of work. Record highs and unemployment lines holding hands at the exact same time. It has happened before, and it'll happen again because the two things were never the same measurement. Now, if I told you the market's at a record high, you'd probably picture all 500 companies rising together, a rising tide lifting every boat. Yeah, that's not what's happening either. Let me show you where the party is actually being held, because it's a much smaller room than you think. There's a group of companies people have started calling the Magnificent Seven: Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Amazon, Alphabet, which is Google, Meta, which is Facebook, and Tesla. 7 companies out of 500. And right now, those 7 names alone make up around 32% of the entire index. Let that sit for a second. 7 names out of 500 are basically a third of the whole thing. Now widen it to the 10 biggest companies, and you're looking at over 40% of the index riding on just 10 stocks. The last time concentration was even close to this extreme was the dot-com bubble back in the year 2000, and we have now sailed well past that mark. So, what does that actually do to you? It means the S&P 500 is basically wearing a costume. It's dressed up as 500 diversified American companies, but underneath it behaves like about 10 enormous, very similar technology stocks holding hands. And in 2025, one single company, Nvidia, was responsible for roughly 15% of the entire index's gain for the whole year. One company out of 500 drove about a sixth of everybody's returns. Here's the part that should genuinely change how you look at your own account. Say you put $10,000 into a normal S&P 500 index fund, the exact thing every finance person, including me, tells you to buy. You think you just bought 500 companies, nicely spread out. What you actually did was put around $3,200 into just those 7 giants, and then sprinkled the remaining 6,800 across the other 493. And by the time you get down to the medium-sized companies in that index, you own, and I mean this literally, a few dollars of each. The 500th company gets pennies, actual pennies. You didn't buy a diversified basket of 500 businesses. You bought 7 big bets wearing a trench coat with the word diversification scribbled on it. Okay, so the board measures the future, it measures global giants, and it's really measuring only about 10 of them. But we still haven't cracked the part that actually explains why Barron feels absolutely nothing and Nikki got richer just by reading a headline. This is the one that matters most, so stay with me here. Ask yourself a stupidly simple question. When the market hits a record high, who actually collects the money? Because a record high isn't free cash raining down on the whole country. I know the headlines make it sound like a piñata just burst open over America. It didn't. It's the value of stocks going up, which means it only helps you if you own the stocks in the first place. And here's the fact that quietly explains almost everything you're feeling. The wealthiest 1% of American households own about half of all the stock in the entire country. The top 1% alone own more stock than the bottom 90% of the country combined. Widen it out to the top 10% of households, and they own somewhere around 90% of all the stock that exists, which leaves the bottom half of the country, half of all the people, owning roughly 1% of the stock market between all of them. So when that headline screams record high and the anchor on TV sounds all excited about it, understand what's really happening. Those gains are landing almost entirely in accounts that already belong to people who were already wealthy. It's not that the party locks you out on purpose, it's that the party is happening inside houses you were never given the keys to. And before someone types, but Nick, I have a 401k, yes, a lot of people own a little bit. But watch the gap between a little and a lot. The typical American with a retirement account has around $4,000 in it. That's the median, the person standing right in the middle, and it's the honest number, not the average that a few giant accounts drag way up. So when the market has a monster year and jumps 20%, that middle of the pack person gains, on paper, maybe $8,000 or $9,000. Real money, genuinely, but it doesn't buy a house and it doesn't fix a bad month. Meanwhile, a household sitting on $2 million in stocks gains $400,000 in the exact same 20% move. Same market, same day, same percentage. One person got a mildly nice number on a screen, the other person just out-earned a full decade of the first person's salary without lifting a single finger. That right there is Nikki and Barron. That was always Nikki and Barron. So now you might be thinking, okay, fine, the rich own most of it, but why does it keep going up, especially when things feel this bad? Shouldn't all the fear and the gloom make it fall? You'd think so, but the market has a couple of engines bolted onto it that shove it higher almost automatically, and once you see them, you genuinely can't unsee them. The first engine is you. Well, your paycheck. Every 2 weeks, tens of millions of people have money pulled automatically out of their paychecks and dumped straight into index funds inside their 401k. And that money buys stocks no matter what the price is. Nobody's checking whether the market's expensive, nobody's reading the news first and deciding to hold off. It's a buyer that shows up every single payday, cash in hand, with exactly zero opinions. Index funds now hold more than half of all the money in American funds. That is a mountain of automatic price blind buying that just never stops. It's like a Roomba that only knows how to buy stocks. The building could be actively on fire and it'd still be quietly bumping into the walls, buying more. And here's the quietly maddening part, that autopilot doesn't care that Barron is behind on his bills. It'll pull your $40 this Friday whether you thought about the market for even 1 second, same as it pulls Nikki's. The catch is that Nikki already has 100 times more riding on it. So the same rising tide lifts her yacht and Barron's dinghy by very, very different amounts. The second engine is companies buying back their own stock. In the last year alone, the companies in the S&P 500 spent over $1 trillion, a record, buying back their own shares. And when a company buys its own stock off the market, there are suddenly fewer slices of the pie left, so each remaining slice is worth a little more, and the price drifts up. It's a company voting for itself with its own wallet. So between the payday autopilot and $1 trillion of buybacks, you've got this relentless, almost mechanical upward pressure that has very little to do with whether regular people are actually doing okay. There used to be a third reason too, this idea people called TINA, there is no alternative. For over a decade, interest rates were basically zero, so savings accounts and bonds paid you nothing, which meant there was nowhere to put your money except stocks. Money flooded in because it had nowhere else to go. That excuse is mostly dead now since bonds actually pay something again. And yet the money mostly stayed in stocks anyway out of pure habit and momentum, which tells you something a little unsettling. At this point, the machine keeps buying, not always because it's a great deal, but because it's built to keep buying. And that right there is the whole engine of the frustration, isn't it? Because at the exact same time, all this money is automatically shoving the scoreboard higher, actual human beings are looking around going, wait, why does everything feel so much worse? And they are not imagining it. Consumer sentiment, which is basically a giant national survey of how people feel about the economy, recently hit some of the lowest readings ever recorded. Lower than the 2008 financial crisis, lower than the worst, most locked down days of the pandemic. People don't feel bad because they're confused or ungrateful. They feel bad because of the receipts. Prices are up roughly 25% since the start of 2020. That's not a typo, and it doesn't reset when inflation cools. That number is cumulative. The money in your pocket buys about a quarter less than it did a few years ago, and it's permanent, unless your paycheck grew to match it. And for a whole lot of people, it just didn't. It caught up to flat, and flat, after all that, does not feel like a celebration. Then there's the housing scoreboard, the one people actually feel right in their chest. The median home now costs around 5 times the median household income. Back in the 90s, that number was closer to 3. The monthly payment on a typical house has roughly doubled since 2020, and the share of buyers purchasing their very first home just fell to the lowest level ever recorded, the lowest since they started tracking this stuff back in 1981. The typical first-time buyer is now 40 years old. So when someone cheerfully tells you the economy is booming because the market's at a record, and your entire lived experience is that you cannot afford the exact house your parents bought at 28, you are not wrong, and you are not bad with money. You're just reading a completely different scoreboard than the one on TV. Yours is measuring your life. Theirs is measuring their assets. And look, if this is scratching some kind of itch for you, if you're the type who'd rather understand the machine than just be vaguely angry at it, that's the exact reason I built a school community. It's a community where I break down how I turn this kind of stuff into a faceless YouTube channel that actually grows, the research, the scripting, the whole system, step by step. No gatekeeping and no upsell. If you've ever quietly thought about building something of your own from this kind of curiosity, the link's in the description. Come hang out. All right, back to it, because I promised you both sides, and the honest version of this story genuinely has two. Now, everything I've said so far probably sounds like I'm winding up to scream it's a bubble, sell everything, Run for the hills. I'm not. Because that would be lazy and it would be dishonest, and the real answer is actually more uncomfortable than a crash warning. The people paying these prices are, not idiots. So let me genuinely steelman them. The bull case is genuinely strong. These giant companies at the very top, they are not the empty hype stocks of the dot-com era. The ones that had a slick website, a dream, and absolutely no profits. These companies print money, real, almost absurd amounts of it, the kind where billions stops being an adjective and starts being a rounding error. Profit margins for the S&P 500 are near the highest they have ever been in recorded history. And those biggest 10 companies don't just take up 40% of the index's size, they generate a genuinely huge share of its actual earnings too. So part of that scary concentration is, weirdly, earned. If a small handful of companies are quietly running the digital plumbing of the entire planet and printing record profits while doing it, then maybe, just maybe. Paying up for them isn't totally insane. That's the bull case, and it honestly deserves your respect. But now the bear case, and it's every bit as real. By almost every long-term measure we've got, stocks are about as expensive right now as they have ever been in history. There's a famous valuation gauge called the CAPE ratio, and right now it's sitting at its second highest reading in roughly 145 years. The only time it was ever higher was the peak of the dot-com bubble, right before that entire thing collapsed. There's another gauge Warren Buffett himself is famous for liking, one that compares the size of the whole market to the size of the whole economy. And it is currently at an all-time record high. Now, none of that guarantees a crash tomorrow. Expensive markets can stay expensive for years, and anyone who tells you they know the exact timing is trying to sell you something. But it does mean two boring, deeply unsexy things are probably true. Future returns starting from these prices are likely to be lower than the last few wild years. And if the mood ever does shift, 40% of the index balanced on 10 very similar stocks is an awful lot of eggs in one extremely shiny basket. So let me put the whole answer in one breath in case you drifted off somewhere around the Roomba. The market measures the future, not your right now. It measures about 10 giant global companies, not 500. And it measures the people who own it, not the people who work for a living. Future, not now. Giants, not 500. Owners, not you. So let me pull this all the way back to Barron and to you and give you the thing you actually came here for, which is what any of this means for a normal human being who isn't a hedge fund. First, record highs all by themselves are not a warning siren. This part really matters because doom is addictive and I refuse to feed it. The market has hit something like 17 new record highs a year on average, going all the way back to 1950. New highs are the normal, healthy, frankly boring default state of a market that grows over decades. So if you're steadily putting money in every single month for the long haul, a record high is absolutely not your cue to panic and yank everything out. Historically, that move is exactly how people lock in the precise loss they were terrified of in the first place. But second, and this is the part that cheerful headlines always skip, you are allowed to hold two ideas in your head at the same time. You can keep calmly investing and also refuse to believe that the last 3 years are some kind of binding promise about the next 3. You can own the index and still know full well that underneath the costume, it's really the same handful of giants doing most of the heavy lifting. And you can quietly decide to spread things out a bit. A little international. Some bonds that finally actually pay you again. Maybe an equal slice of all 500 companies instead of a giant lopsided bet on 7. That's not fear. That's just refusing to mistake a scoreboard for a guarantee. Because here's the thing I really genuinely want you to walk away with. The stock market hitting a record high was never ever a statement about how you specifically are doing. It was never measuring your rent, your raise, your grocery bill, or your shot at a house. It's a scoreboard for one specific game, played mostly by people who already own the field. And the moment you truly understand that, the frustration actually loosens its grip a little, because you finally stop waiting for a number on a screen to come rescue a life it was never ever built to measure. Baron is still down in that building, still doing his grim little bill math. Nikki is still 3 floors up, still watching her number quietly climb. And the honest, slightly uncomfortable truth is that the same green arrow means two completely different things to the two of them, and it always will, right up until the day Baron owns a piece of that field himself. Because that's the actual game. It was never about timing the board or waiting for it to save you. It's about slowly, boringly, unglamorously buying your own way onto the field, one automatic paycheck at a time, until one day a record high finally means something for you too. So here's the question I'll leave you sitting with, and it's genuinely the one worth chewing on. If that record high was never measuring you in the first place, then what would it actually take to get you into the game it is measuring? Sit with that one. And if you want to start figuring it out alongside other people doing the exact same thing, well, you already know where I'll be. It's that community. Links right down below. I'll see you in the next one.